Blood soaked into the marble floor of the penthouse, pooling around his handmade Italian shoes. Raphael wiped his blade, his voice a low, lethal hum in the silent room. "I told you, Beatrice," he whispered, turning towards the shadows. "Never look at me when I am like this." In the sprawling, gilded cage of the Ferraro estate on Chicago's Gold Coast, invisibility was a survival mechanism. Beatrice Marchetti had perfected the art of being unseen. Among the sleek, stiletto-wearing socialites and the sharp-suited enforcers of the Ferraro syndicate, Beatrice stood out by simply not fitting in. She was soft where their world was entirely sharp edges. Plus-sized, quiet, and perpetually clad in the drab grey uniform of the estate's domestic staff, she was completely disregarded by the dangerous men who ran the city's underworld. To them, she was just a fixture, a chubby maid who scrubbed the floors and changed the linens. But Beatrice possessed a different kind of armor. Her softness concealed a profound, unshakable resilience. She had grown up in the neglected neighborhoods of the South Side, surviving poverty and a broken family. The mockery she endured regarding her weight from the superficial elite only thickened her skin. She had learned early on that being underestimated was a weapon. She noticed everything. She knew which capos were skimming from the ledger, which alliances were fraying, and precisely how much bleach was required to scrub away the metallic scent of blood from the Persian rugs in the basement. And she knew Raffaele Ferraro. Raphael was the undisputed head of the Ferraro syndicate, a man whose reputation was built on ruthless efficiency and a terrifyingly calm demeanor. He was an apex predator, disguised in custom Brioni suits. He rarely spoke to the staff, viewing them as necessary phantoms, but Beatrice had always been acutely aware of his presence. The air in the room would grow heavy and cold the moment he stepped through the door. Their first true interaction happened on a freezing Tuesday night in November. Beatrice was in the master study, meticulously cleaning up a shattered crystal decanter and a concerning amount of crimson stained into the mahogany floorboards. She had not expected Raffaele to return so early from a meeting with the Russian factions. The heavy oak doors swung open, and Raphael walked in, his suit jacket discarded, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms covered in dark, fresh blood. He stopped, his dark, calculating eyes locking onto the curvy Maid, kneeling on the floor with a sponge and a bucket. Most staff members would have scrambled, averted their eyes, and begged for their lives for witnessing the dawn in such a compromised state. Beatrice merely wrung out the sponge, the water turning pink, and continued scrubbing. She did not tremble. She did not scream. She just worked. Raphael watched her in silence for a long time. The juxtaposition of her soft, gentle form against the grim, violent reality of his world fascinated him. When he finally spoke, his voice was a deep baritone that vibrated through the floorboards. "Why are you not running, Beatrice?" She paused, surprised he even knew her name. "The floors will stain if I do not finish, Mr. Ferraro," she answered softly, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. He stepped closer, the scent of copper and expensive cologne washing over her. He loomed above her, a towering figure of violence. "Look down," he commanded softly. She obeyed, fixing her gaze on the tips of his leather shoes. "In this house you will see many things you should not," Raphael said, his tone carrying a strange, possessive warning. "You are quiet. I value quiet. But you must remember one rule, Beatrice. When the monster comes out, you keep your head down. You do not look at me. If you see the devil in my eyes, you will never be able to unsee him. And I will not allow you to fear me." He left the room, leaving Beatrice alone in the quiet study. From that night on, a strange, unspoken dynamic shifted between them. Raphael ensured she was heavily compensated. The mocking from the other staff abruptly ceased after the head housekeeper was dismissed without explanation. Raphael was building a fortress around her, and Beatrice, despite her better judgment, found herself feeling inexplicably safe in the shadow of a killer. Peace in the Chicago underworld was always a fragile illusion, and it shattered completely with the arrival of Preston Ashford. Preston was the ruthless architect behind the Ashford Syndicate, a sprawling criminal empire with roots in British and Irish organized crime. Preston was everything Raphael was not: loud, sadistic, and deeply insecure in his power. He did not just want to take over Ferraro territory, he wanted to humiliate Raphael. Preston operated through terror, targeting the families, the weak, and the unprotected elements of his enemies' organizations. Preston had gathered intelligence on the Ferraro estate. He knew Raffaele's defenses were nearly impenetrable, but Preston was a man who looked for the smallest cracks in the foundation. Word had reached him through a compromised guard about an anomaly in the Don's behavior. A maid, a quiet, plus-sized woman who received unprecedented privileges and unseen protection. Preston, sensing a vulnerability, decided to strike where Raphael least expected. The attack came on a torrential night when Raphael was miles away at the docks, lured out by a false tip regarding a hijacked shipment. The estate was operating on a skeleton crew of guards. Beatrice was in the East Wing kitchens, preparing a late-night cup of tea, finding comfort in the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the glass. The sound of shattering glass and silenced gunfire ripped through the tranquility. Beatrice dropped her teacup, the porcelain shattering against the tiles. She did not panic. Her survival instincts, honed in the rough streets of her youth, kicked in instantly. She heard heavy, unfamiliar boots moving through the hallway. Men with thick accents were barking orders. "Hunting. Find the fat maid," a voice echoed down the corridor, dripping with cruel amusement. "Ashford wants her alive. Let us see how much Ferraro really cares about the hired help." Beatrice's blood ran cold. They were not here for the vault or the ledgers. They were here for her. She moved swiftly, her soft frame allowing her to slip silently into the adjacent pantry. She huddled in the dark behind heavy bags of flour and sacks of potatoes, her breathing shallow and controlled. She refused to be a victim. She grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from a lower shelf, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the handle. She was terrified, yes, but beneath the fear was a simmering anger. She had fought her whole life just to exist. She was not going to let Preston Ashford's thugs drag her away like a helpless prize. The pantry door swung open. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness. A mercenary stepped inside, grinning as the light caught the edge of her grey uniform. "Found you, sweetheart," he sneered, reaching out to grab her hair. Beatrice swung the iron skillet with every ounce of strength in her body. The heavy metal connected solidly with the man's knee. He roared in pain, collapsing to the ground. Beatrice scrambled over him, darting out of the pantry and rushing blindly down the hallway toward the grand foyer, but she was cut off. 3 more of Ashford's men emerged from the shadows, their weapons raised. Beatrice backed against the cold stone wall, her chest heaving. She clutched the skillet, her eyes defiant. She might have been soft, but she would not break. Before the men could advance, the front doors of the estate exploded inward, splintering off their hinges. The storm outside seemed to rush into the foyer, bringing with it a nightmare. Raffaele Ferraro stood in the doorway, soaked in rain, his eyes completely devoid of humanity. He had realized the trap at the docks too late and had driven back like a madman, consumed by a blinding, terrifying panic he had never known before. He saw Beatrice cornered, and something inside the cold, calculating Mafia Boss snapped violently. "Close your eyes, Beatrice," Raphael roared, the sound monstrous and deafening. "Do not look at me." The massacre that followed was brief, brutal, and intimate. Raphael did not use a gun. He moved with the terrifying speed of a predator, drawing a heavy tactical knife. He tore through Preston Ashford's men with a savage desperation. The foyer became a slaughterhouse, the air thick with the metallic stench of blood and the sickening sounds of tearing flesh and dying gasps. Beatrice pressed herself against the wall, her hands trembling. Raphael had told her to keep her head down. He had warned her never to look at him when the devil took over. He wanted to preserve the delicate, quiet image she had of him. He was terrified that her soft soul would be repulsed by the true extent of his darkness. But Beatrice did not close her eyes. She watched him. She saw the monster he claimed to be, tearing men apart with his bare hands. But what Beatrice saw was not a devil reveling in blood. She saw a man frantic, a man tearing the world apart simply because someone had threatened her. She saw the violent, terrifying depths of his protection. When the last body hit the floor, silence returned to the foyer, save for Raphael's heavy, ragged breathing. He stood in the center of the carnage, his clothes ruined, his hands coated in crimson. He was rigid, his back turned to her. He was terrified to turn around. He was waiting for her to scream, to run away, to look at him with the same disgust and fear that the rest of the world did. "Tipu, look away, Beatrice," he whispered, his voice cracking with a vulnerability that the underworld would never believe the Don of the Ferraro Syndicate possessed. "I told you not to look." Instead of running, Beatrice let the heavy iron skillet slip from her fingers. It clattered loudly against the floor. She took a step forward, her soft shoes stepping over the blood pooling on the marble. She did not see a monster. She saw a man who had built a fortress around her. She walked up behind him and, with trembling but resolute hands, wrapped her arms around his rigid waist, pressing her soft, warm body against his blood-soaked back. "I am looking, Raphael," she whispered softly against his shoulder, "and I am not afraid." Raphael let out a shuddering breath, dropping his knife. He turned, pulling her fiercely into his chest, burying his face in her hair. In a world of wolves and betrayal, the invisible, chubby Maid had just become the most powerful weakness the Mafia Boss had ever known. And Preston Ashford had no idea the hell he had just unleashed upon himself. After the massacre in the foyer, the dynamic within the Ferraro estate changed irreversibly. Beatrice Marchetti was no longer the invisible maid who scrubbed the floors and changed the linens. By the time the professional cleanup crew arrived to remove the bodies of Preston Ashford's men and scrub the marble tiles clean, Raphael had personally carried Beatrice up the grand sweeping staircase and deposited her in the center of his own master suite. He locked the heavy, reinforced oak doors behind them, effectively shutting out the rest of the world and sealing her within the impenetrable vault of his absolute protection. For 3 grueling days, he did not let her out of his sight. The cold, calculating Don of the Chicago underworld had transformed into a fiercely obsessed guardian, pacing the floors like a sword predator. He refused to attend the emergency syndicate meetings he had called, opting instead to conduct his ruthless, bloody business from the velvet armchair in the corner of his bedroom, his dark, intense eyes tracking Beatrice's every single movement. He had a designer brought to the estate under heavy guard, commissioning custom silk loungewear and flowing dresses for her, completely replacing the drab grey uniform she had worn for years. The soft, luxurious fabrics complemented her lush, plus-sized curves flawlessly, a visual testament to her drastically elevated status. She was no longer a servant who blended into the wallpaper. She was the undeniable center of his violently protective universe. But Beatrice was not content to simply be a pampered, terrified captive in a gilded cage. While Raphael was consumed by his manic need to keep her safe from the invisible threats lurking outside the estate walls, Beatrice remained remarkably grounded. Her resilience, forged in the fires of a difficult, poverty-stricken life on the South Side, refused to let her cower in the shadows. She sat at the edge of the massive, custom king-sized bed, her posture straight, calmly watching Raphael bark lethal orders into a secure burner phone, orchestrating the systematic, brutal dismantling of Ashford's street-level drug and weapons operations. When he finally hung up, aggressively pitching the phone onto the mattress and pinching the bridge of his nose in sheer exhaustion, she spoke. Her voice was steady and calm, slicing effortlessly through the heavy, suffocating tension in the master bedroom. "The man in the pantry," Beatrice said softly, referring to the mercenary she had struck. "The one I hit with the iron skillet. He smelled overwhelmingly like burning sulfur and stagnant, rotten water. And when he stepped into the light, I saw that he had thick, reddish clay caked deep into the treads of his tactical boots." Raphael froze entirely, his dark, calculating eyes snapping immediately to her face. He crossed the expansive room in 3 long strides, sinking to his knees before her so they were exactly at eye level. He reached out, his large, calloused, heavily scarred hands gently resting on her soft knees. He looked at her not as a victim, but as an equal. "What else, Beatrice?" he demanded, his voice low and urgent. "Tell me exactly what you remember. Leave nothing out." He did not dismiss her observations as the ramblings of a traumatized civilian. He did not treat her like a fragile porcelain object that needed to be completely shielded from the ugly, gritty truth of his criminal world. He recognized the sharp, intensely observant mind hidden beneath her gentle, unassuming exterior. Beatrice met his intense gaze steadily, her heart beating a steady rhythm. The clay was highly distinct. "It is not regular mud. I used to see it all the time when I took the public transit bus past the old industrial sector near the Calumet River, back when I lived in the lower wards. There is a massive abandoned chemical plant down there. The soil around it is stained a deep, unnatural red from decades of toxic rust and chemical runoff. It is the only place in the city with that specific combination of smells and mud." A terrifying, predatory smile slowly curved Raphael's lips, transforming his handsome features into something beautifully demonic. Preston Ashford was notorious for being a ghost, constantly moving between hidden safe houses and underground bunkers to avoid retaliation from the rival syndicates. But Beatrice, the very woman Preston had targeted because he thought she was weak, soft, and entirely insignificant, had just handed Raphael the master key to his sworn enemy's fortress. "You are absolutely magnificent," Raphael murmured, lifting her hand and pressing a deeply reverent kiss to the back of her knuckles. "You see everything they try to hide. You just gave me his head on a silver platter." Meanwhile, across the sprawling, rain-slicked city, Preston Ashford was rapidly unraveling. The catastrophic failure of the estate raid had cost him his best, most expensive men, and made him a complete laughingstock among the rival Irish and Russian factions. He had severely underestimated Raphael Ferraro's attachment to the chubby Maid. Preston paced the cracked concrete floors of the abandoned, Calumet chemical plant, surrounded by heavily armed mercenaries who looked increasingly nervous. He was a cornered rat, desperate, furious, and increasingly erratic. He knew without a doubt that Raphael was coming for him. But he arrogantly believed his reinforced industrial fortress was entirely impenetrable. He planned to lure Raphael into a bloody meat grinder, intending to execute the Don in front of his men, and then personally hunt down Beatrice Marchetti to finish the job and reclaim his terrifying reputation. He did not realize that the devil himself was already standing at his front door, and he was bringing hell with him. The coordinated assault on the Calumet chemical plant was not a standard mafia raid. It was a highly calculated, merciless execution. Raphael did not send his underbosses or capos to handle Preston Ashford. He led the heavily armed vanguard himself, driven by a dark, all-consuming rage that demanded profound personal satisfaction. He had relocated Beatrice to a highly secure, heavily fortified luxury penthouse in the heart of the city, guarded by a dozen of his most lethal, trusted enforcers. But even though she was miles away, her soft presence lingered heavily in his mind, fueling his ruthless mechanical efficiency. He would burn the entire city to the bedrock to ensure she could sleep without fear. Deafening gunfire echoed violently through the rusted, cavernous corridors of the factory, as Raffaella and his syndicate operatives systematically dismantled Preston's outer defenses. It was a terrifying symphony of violence, calculated and brutally precise. The Ashford syndicates hired mercenaries, men who were used to intimidating unarmed civilians and extorting small business owners, broke almost instantly under the heavily disciplined, terrifying assault of the elite Ferraro enforcers. Raphael moved through the smoke and chaos like a vengeful shadow, his customized submachine gun clearing rooms with lethal, unwavering accuracy. He was a terrifying force of nature, seemingly untouched by the desperate hail of bullets that sparked loudly against the metal catwalks and concrete pillars around him. He was a predator hunting its ultimate prey, and his prey had absolutely nowhere left to run. He finally found Preston Ashford, cowering in the central control room on the top floor, barricaded heavily behind reinforced ballistic glass and thick steel doors. Preston was clutching a wireless explosive detonator, his face pale, gaunt, and slick with terrified sweat as he watched his sprawling criminal empire crumble to ash on the grainy security monitors. Raphael did not bother negotiating. The heavy steel door blew inward with a deafening, earth-shaking blast of C4 plastic explosives, throwing Preston violently to the floor in a shower of sparks and shattered glass. Through the thick, acrid smoke and falling concrete debris stepped Raffaele Ferraro. He dropped his empty weapon, the heavy metal clattering loudly against the concrete floor, and drew the exact same heavy, serrated tactical knife he had used to butcher the men at the estate. His custom-tailored suit was completely ruined, his face smeared with dark ash and wet blood. But his dark eyes were entirely calm. It was the chilling, hollow, dead calm of a man who had completely given himself over to the monster within. Preston scrambled backward frantically, his boots slipping on the bloody floor, holding up the detonator with a wildly trembling hand. "Stay back, Ferraro," he screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "I have the entire structural foundation of this building wired with heavy explosives. You take one more step toward me, and we all burn to ash." Raphael did not even break his predatory stride. He closed the physical distance between them in a terrifying, unnatural blur of motion. Before Preston's finger could even twitch toward the trigger button, Raphael's hand shot out with blinding speed, crushing Preston's wrist with a sickening, audible snap of bone. The plastic detonator clattered harmlessly to the floor, sliding away into the shadows. Raphael immediately grabbed Preston by the lapels of his jacket and slammed him brutally against the shattered control panels. He pressed his heavy forearm directly into the man's throat, effectively cutting off his air supply and lifting him slightly off the ground. "You came into my home," Raphael whispered, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that promised hours of unimaginable agony. "You sent your filthy animals to hunt down the woman who belongs to me. You frightened what is exclusively mine." Preston choked violently, spitting dark blood onto Raphael's ruined shirt, his eyes wide with genuine, absolute terror as he looked into the bottomless void of Raphael's gaze. All this destruction, all these men dead, over a fat, insignificant, ugly maid? Preston wheezed pathetically, entirely unable to comprehend the sheer depth of Raphael's obsession. "She is absolutely nothing!" Raphael's facial expression did not change a single millimeter, but the temperature in the shattered room seemed to drop drastically below freezing. "She is the only reason I have mercifully allowed the rest of this pathetic city to survive for this long," Raphael stated softly, twisting the tactical knife in his hand. "She is my absolute anchor to humanity. And you tried to take her from me." Raphael drove the heavy tactical knife upward with devastating force, ending Preston Ashford's reign of terror in one brutal, highly definitive motion. He let the lifeless body fall heavily to the floor, stepping over it without a single second glance. The bloody message to the entire Chicago underworld was crystal clear. Beatrice Marchetti was an untouchable goddess, and anyone who even looked at her with disrespect would be violently erased from existence. When Raphael finally returned to the secure, silent penthouse, dawn was just breaking over the vast expanse of Lake Michigan, painting the morning sky in vibrant hues of bruised purple, crimson, and gold. He was physically exhausted, heavily battered, and covered completely in the grim remnants of a brutal gang war. He stopped at the threshold of the master bedroom, hesitating with his hand on the doorknob. The adrenaline was finally fading from his bloodstream, and the deep-seated fear that had haunted him for days crept back into his chest. He was a terrifying creature of blood and violence, and he was absolutely terrified that the heavy scent of death on his skin would finally push her away. Beatrice was awake. She was sitting peacefully in a plush, velvet armchair by the floor-to-ceiling window, quietly watching the sunrise over the water. She turned her head as the heavy door creaked open, her soft, observant eyes sweeping slowly over his heavily bruised face, his torn clothes, and the dark, dried bloodstains that coated his hands up to his wrists. She did not gasp in horror. She did not shrink back in fear. She stood up gracefully, her soft, curved figure moving with a quiet, undeniable strength. She walked deliberately over to him, stopping mere inches away. Raphael kept his arms rigid at his sides, refusing to touch her and taint her with the filthy dirt of his violent world. But his eyes pleaded with her desperately in the silent, intimate language they had built between them. "It is completely done?" she asked, her voice acting as a soothing, gentle balm against his heavily frayed nerves. "Ashford will never breathe another breath," Raphael replied, his voice thick and hoarse. "No one in this city will ever look at you with disrespect again. No one will ever threaten your life. You are entirely safe, Beatrice. I made sure of it." She reached out slowly, her warm, soft, unblemished hands gently cupping his rough, blood-stained face. She did not attempt to wipe the dirt or the blood away. She simply accepted him exactly as he was in that raw moment. A ruthless, terrifying mafia boss to the outside world, but a wildly devoted, intensely obsessed protector exclusively to her. "I was never truly afraid of him, Raphael," she murmured softly, stepping closer until her lush body pressed flush against his solid, unyielding frame. "And I am still not afraid of you. I never was." Raphael closed his eyes tightly, leaning heavily into her gentle touch. Letting out a long, shuddering breath he felt he had been holding in since the exact night they first spoke in the study. He finally moved his arms, wrapping them tightly around her soft waist, pulling her flush against his chest, and burying his face deep in the crook of her neck. He greedily inhaled the sweet, clean, intoxicating scent of vanilla and lavender that belonged entirely to her, letting it wash away the metallic stench of the factory. "You are my absolute queen, Beatrice," he whispered directly into her warm skin, his voice thick with a fierce, unbreakable and terrifying devotion. "My beautiful, brilliant, perfect queen. I will let the entire world burn to the ground before I ever let you go." In the cold, unforgiving, heavily armed world of the Chicago Mafia, the invisible, underestimated, chubby Maid had not just managed to survive. She had conquered the devil himself, binding his dark, violently protective heart to her soft, unyielding soul forever. If this dark, high-stakes mafia romance kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for more gripping, gritty underworld stories. What was your absolute favorite moment between the ruthless Raphael and the brilliant, resilient Beatrice? Drop a comment below and let us know your thoughts. Do not forget to share this video with your fellow dark romance lovers and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next thrilling upload.